I go back to this podcast twice, three, maybe even four times a year. The wisdom in the Joe Rogan Experience, episode 1309 with Naval Ravikant, is timeless, and it has impacted me in ways that has really been formative for how I go about my life. The title basically of this episode is Wealth, Happiness, and the Art of Doing Nothing. And for those who don't know Naval, he is a unicorn. He is a guy who has a deep technical knowledge while also a deep spiritual understanding of how humans kind of work. And he's been able to synthesize this in a way that has really been impactful for millions of people across the world. And, he uses this conversation with Rogan as a way to basically give a synopsis of all of his thoughts and ideas. And this episode came out, I think, in like 2016, but it still bangs every time. And he's done podcasts that are really good that I'll review at some point in the future since then. But this was like the first kind of look into his thinking and thought process that I just, like I said, I keep coming back. So just a few takeaways from this episode. The biggest one is you're not going to get rich renting out your time. You're not going to get rich unless you own equity. You need to own stock, whatever you call it, real estate, some sort of leverage that allows your growth to compound. So one of the things that I learned fairly quickly when I was working in corporate America was I could do 50, 60, 70 hours of work in a week, and that wouldn't really change the output that I received from like a, year-end performance review perspective than if I were to put in 20 or 30 hours in a week. And that was frustrating because I'll get into it a little bit with some more of these lessons, but I realized that I'm not going to get wealthy. Rich is kind of a word here that Naval talks about that is, it's catchy, it's a good hook, but the real thing we're looking for is wealth. And in this age of the internet, of AI, and just of what Naval calls infinite leverage, you need to have two things that you then pair with leverage. So either specific knowledge or accountability. And when you have those two things, and if you could pair them and then add some leverage, that's like adding gasoline to a fire, and the growth will be crazy. So he gets into it, talking about a bunch of different ways on how you can get leverage and how you can be irreplaceable. We hear all the time, nobody is irreplaceable, everybody's replaceable. Now, that is depending on exactly what you're discussing. Like, if you are building a brand around you and then you disappear, then you're irreplaceable, and everybody's irreplaceable. Everybody's a unique human. We all have our own fingerprint, right? So there is that irreplaceability, and he talks here about owning equity, having these specific knowledge, and being able to use the internet, being able to put your name on it to something that can scale to millions, if not billions of people. And we're seeing that today. You're seeing these stories of you know, people who build tools on a weekend and they're generating crazy revenue because they solved a problem, and they have the ability to build now with tools like Claude Code or Codex or Lovable, and then they have the leverage to scale it across the entire internet. If somebody sees that and says, "Oh, that solves a problem that I need. Yeah, I'll pay the $20. Yeah, I'll pay the $200. Yeah, I'll pay the $20,000 for some of these things." That is just something that will continue to be relevant, especially as we get into this age of where people might be not even might be, people are already losing their jobs. Unfortunately, people feel like there's a tidal wave of just, uncertainty that's coming, and the only thing that we are certain about is that you everybody is a unique version of themselves, and I think that's a really cool, perspective to be able to bring, when showing up in a way that's authentic, when showing up in a way that's, connecting with others, and it just gives a little bit of a, like, release towards that burden because everybody is working through and dealing with these things in their own way. So I also really like this idea of work like a lion, not a cow. So going back to those days in corporate America, it was very much like you had to do this and you had to finish all these tasks, and it was mundane, and there were processes to follow, and you became very boxed in. Versus like a lion, where a lion just sleeps probably 80% of its day, and then the 20% where it needs to find food or it needs to, provide for the pride, it goes to work, it sprints, and then it relaxes, and that's something that I've really learned over the last year, in this entrepreneurial, more startup-like journey, where some weeks are gonna be tough, and every week is going to have specific things that need to get done. However, there are moments in time where you can have a little bit of a break, and you can reassess and learn and, really dive into something that sparks curiosity, and, here's an example of it right now of the first, review here. So again, owning equity, building leverage, and the irreplaceability is just yourself because everybody is irreplaceable, as unique, special humans that we are. So the next takeaway then becomes this idea around desire, and what do we desire and what do we want? And what's interesting is when we start to actually get into the brass tacks of what we want, a lot of people don't know what they want. Some people think they want the money, they think they want the cars, they think they want the girlfriend, but is that really what you want, or is that just what you think you want because it's what you see on Instagram? I mean, like, how many stories have we heard of billionaires who are depressed? And Naval talks about it in this episode. Like, John Bellion quotes it how many of these people want to kill themselves because they just don't have the connections. And that's something that I've really wrestled with because I don't like to be on camera and share these things, but I also feel called to do it for whatever reason. And maybe it's because I need to learn this lesson. Like, maybe it's because I do want to achieve this, financial freedom that is, feeling so, like, in the grasp, but also like a what is it? Like you pick up a handful of sand and it just drips away because of things getting more expensive and inflationary, pressures, and just the what seems like constant added costs to anything that you want to save up for. Like, oh, I want to get a car. Well, have you thought about getting insurance? Have you thought about, parking? Have you thought about all these things? Where it's like, wait, like I thought I was needed to budget, a reasonable amount for a half decent car, but these are costs that are so invisible at the forefront that it becomes daunting to even like go forward with it. I mean, and that's just a car. Like then you start to get to a house and it's like closing costs and insurance and brokers and all these things. So all that to say is most people don't know what they want, and Naval touches on it here. It's desire is a contract you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get what you want. But what's interesting is how many people have achieved goals that they said would make them happy, and they're still unhappy. That's a Chris Williamson, kind of ism that he brought that he brought to light for me over the last few years. Is like I have accomplished goals that I said would make me happy, and I'm still like, trying to figure out exactly like what is that happiness, Naval puts it nicely where he kind of just gives this little dichotomy of peace is happiness at rest, happiness is peace in motion. That's great, but is that really true? And what is happiness? Is happiness like a feeling? Is it a physical thing that you like? Is there a moment where you're like, "Yes, I'm happy"? Sometimes, for sure, but what happens when I'm in a moment of suffering and I appreciate that suffering, right? Like, if I'm going through a really hard challenge and I have the presence of mind to say, "Wow, this is hard, but I'm gonna get through it." Like, that is a moment of happiness, but it's also a moment of suffering. So it's you dance in these dichotomies of paradoxes, and that's what's beautiful about a lot of the things that he talks about in this episode. I mean, he says, "If you're so smart, why aren't you happy?" And that's like that's what's the oh gosh, this is gonna kill me. What's the paradox? No, it's not a paradox. It's it'll come to me. The curse of the competent. The curse of the competent. It's like, if you have this self-awareness and you feel things that are positive, negative, complex, simple, all these, emotions that swirl, and you end up either just living inside your head or even suppressing the emotions, especially as men, then you start to realize, like, oh, wait, I haven't been able to hop out of bed. Like, maybe I'm not happy, or I haven't had a desire to go to the gym. Is that because I like am feeling this kind of um feeling an uncertainty of how I show up physically? Has all the work that I put in not been quote unquote worth it? Because there are areas of my life that I thought would improve by going to the gym, and maybe they haven't. Um, yeah, fitness is a choice, health is a choice, and working hard is a choice. Happiness can be a choice, and I totally agree with that from Naval in certain respects. I think one of the things that I pride myself on is always showing up being like a positive energy, positive vibe guy, right? Like I really don't want to be an energy drain on people. I want to give them energy. I try to build a rapport with people. It's not easy to do all the time, especially when you have days that are hard and dragging and you're tired. But it's also it's important to identify the people that you want to be around, that it's reciprocated, and you can start to really project what that emotion and what that feeling becomes. And sometimes you won't be able to show up at your 100% self, but maybe your 75 or 50 or maybe even your 20% self will be just enough where that person can read that on you and say, "Hey, what's up?" And then you can talk through it. You can have a real conversation. You can discuss challenges or problems or difficulties, and then you start to accept. And I think that's really important on the path towards happiness, is that understanding of acceptance. Because once you accept it and once you label it, then you can start to kind of s- synthesize and digest it. You can shed it. That's hard because that takes a lot of inner work and a lot of like sitting down in silence, and that's where it actually flows nicely of the conversation that Naval has, because he says that we don't seek peace of mind, we seek peace from mind. And the only solution is to turn it off. So, this part of the episode, they really start to go into meditation, and the idea of meditation and what we're actually looking to do when we meditate. And that's a interesting kind of analysis, because there's no like right way to meditate. Like the idea that, yoga is everything, right? Like everything we do is technically yoga in a sense. And sometimes you're working in line with it, and sometimes you're working out of line with it. So if I'm scrolling on my phone, doom scrolling through Instagram, doom scrolling through Twitter, doom scrolling through XYZ, that is, in a twisted sense, a sort of meditation. It's not, I would argue, a healthy meditation, but it is a meditation, more or less. And he discusses this idea of like your diet, right? So there's a lot of different diets that we take in. There's obviously our food diet, which is the most kind of surface level that we think of. Like, are we putting good food into our body? Are we eating too much sugar? Like all these things that he talks about here. Like this addicts you, and it basically like separates your conscious mind from your unconscious to where you just begin like kind of going through the motions. And there's seemingly an attempt for people to just default to this versus the opposite, where as simple as it sounds, the art of doing nothing, it's really hard. And I've noticed this as a yoga teacher. When I cue people to the final pose, the Shavasana pose, regardless of what style of class it is, it could be a yin class, it could be a power flow vinyasa, it could be a free flow vinyasa, it could be like Vikram, breathwork, whatever. Once you cue Shavasana, you learn and you notice that it's really hard for people to sit still. It's hard to melt into that nothingness because what truly is that, right? You start to get into this idea of the conscious mind and who we are as spirits and everything's connected in the universe and all that woo woo shit, right? But it's also when we have, tens of thousands of thoughts a day and thousands of decisions that we make and, hundreds, if not thousands of recurring thoughts that we have throughout the day. It makes sense. Our mind gets loud. And yoga is great because a true yoga practice, in my opinion, or at least a true asana practice, I'll clarify there. A true asana practice, in my opinion, is challenging enough to where if you are not present and focused on what is going on in your body from each breath and each balance, then you're not going to be able to sustain the practice, right? You won't be able to keep balance. You won't be able to follow the flow that hopefully feels natural as you're kind of creating this dance with your body and breath. And hopefully that like, 45, 50 minutes to an hour is like so kind of uh thought like what's the how do I want to say this? Like it requires so much focus and energy that when you get to that moment of doing nothing, you're like, "Ah, I earned this. Like, I can do nothing." And then you just kind of settle into that abyss of nothingness. Whereas if you're, distracted and all these things and you're thinking about work, you're thinking about email, you're thinking about, hit me up when he said he would. She didn't text me back when I thought we were having a good vibe. You're gonna start to you're gonna start to kind of, twitch and nudge, and it's hard. So, meditation is a practice, it is a skill, it is a muscle, like, I struggle with it, but I really love the, analogy that Naval uses around your mind being an email inbox, because I'm somebody who doesn't always stay at inbox 0, but there is that sense of relief that like, just like a sigh of relief when you get to inbox 0 because you feel as though you can do nothing, right? There's no like quote unquote task that you need to do when everything is complete. And that you can find that in the mind. And sometimes you just have to hit snooze on an email just to get to that inbox 0. You realize you're like, okay, like I am in a state of tension, stress, whatever you want to call it, like I just need to log off for a second. And this is not something that is so pressing that I need to deal with it right now. So I'm going to snooze it till tomorrow. And when you do that, not only in email, which is a great tip, but also just in real life, you start to understand that, oh, like, wait, I can not only do I keep pushing this thing off, but I actually am pushing it off because it's not important. Right. And then the things that are important continue to come up. And when you get into that sense of presence and it's like, "Oh, this is the only thing I can think about," well, yeah, I'm gonna take action and I'm actually gonna complete it and I'm gonna get it done. So I just love that analogy. I use that all the time in my classes, when I'm leading, meditation. It makes so much sense. Another thing really quick just around, like, meditation and practices in general. Naval talks about how he doesn't use any apps or anything. I personally don't really use any apps, but I do really like guided meditation as well. So sometimes I'll like find a YouTube video or some soft music to have in the background, just because like it is good. It's also good to focus on one thing, similar to that asana practice that I was talking about. Like if you're, you know, just focused on one thing, if it's your breath, great. If it's one voice, awesome. If it's one song or, then that's another, that is still meditation. So, uh, just wanted to kind of call that out because it's important. It's not, there's no right or wrong way. Like there's no right or wrong way to do it. All right. So last takeaway. Life is a single player game. It's all going on in your head. The world reflects your own feelings back at you. To a tree, there is no concept of right or wrong. That's super interesting. I say all the time, life is a mirror. Project out good vibes. Good vibes will come back out to you. I already kind of talked about that showing up in a positive light for everybody. And you can start to think about karma. You could think about all these different things. But at the end of the day, like it says, reality is neutral. And something that I really appreciated Naval talking about in this episode is life does not have to be a zero sum game. And this is something that we see a lot today in like our economic system, and in our, just political system. And not so much in the business world from my experience, but there's a bunch of stories, and like TV shows and movies that you could point to that probably says it's the case. But a zero sum game is basically, in order for me to get a point, you have to lose a point, right? So you're always coming back to zero. If I get 2 points, then that means I took two from you. And that inherently means that there's a winner and a loser. But when you're talking about something like business or something that is like the energy that you're projecting out, you can have a positive sum where we both benefit. There's been times, right, where I'm sure any of you watching have had like a really great experience when I get a good haircut, shout out Michelle. When I get a good coffee, shout out Medici. Like when I go to a Bitcoin meetup or a Bitcoin Park summit, like I feel like I'm getting positive value from that. So I am okay in giving positive value there, right? Versus going back to the car example, you bring your car in and the mechanic or the auto dealer is like, "Oh, you actually need this fix and this fix." And you're like, "Wait, like I feel like I'm getting ripped off. Like I just thought I needed an oil change." So that's been a big mindset shift for me. Um, Positive sum games. I don't want to play zero sum games. I don't want to get in arguments where in order for me to progress, that means you need to sink down. Like that's just not my vibe. Like I try to I try to connect and do good by all. So yeah, I mean just basically like it's neutral to start, but everybody can level up together. And that might be a little bit of a naive thing to say, but I also think it's true. I think that there are practices that people can do together to get stronger connections. I think there are concepts and philosophies that we can all study to treat people in a healthier way. Even if we disagree. And yeah, it just that was a mindset shift for me for sure. So I'll end it here. I quote this all the time from Naval, well, Confucius, but I learned it from Naval. Every man has two lives, and the second one starts to realize the moment he realizes he just has one. And yeah, you got nothing to lose, right? Like you can continue to follow the path that feels aligned to you. Humility is knowing your place in the world. And that becomes a really like strong light or guide for when you're making decisions because life's short, life's hard. And at the end of the day, like we're all just making it up as we go. So we might as well do the things that we feel called to do. And I know that's a like spiritual woo woo type of kind of send off, but it's also there is science backing up like our gut feeling is oftentimes right. Like, following your heart is oftentimes a valuable experience. You know, I heard a friend say literally today, he said, "Life makes sense in reverse. The issue is that live life forward." So looking back on all these experiences, you're probably going to say, "Oh, it was actually good that I lost that job or that that relationship ended or that you know, I tried to do XYZ." Because at the end of the day, there's lessons that come from it. And you're still here, you're still standing, and you have one life. But the second you notice that, then maybe you can make a change to where you can shed what that previous quote unquote life was.